The room went silent as Charlie Kirk leaned back in his chair, that familiar smirk plastered across his face like a badge of arrogance. For years, he had thrived on these moments. The stage lights glaring, the cameras rolling, his audience ready to cheer every cutting jab. He believed he owned the space, that his quick tongue and sharper sneer would once again reduce his opponent to stammers and silence. But this time was different. Within minutes, that smirk would vanish forever. Charlie had come armed with his usual bag of tricks, interruption, mockery, the smug certainty of someone who has rarely been challenged by facts he couldn't twist. His supporters in the crowd leaned forward eagerly, expecting another easy spectacle. They had no idea they were about to witness a collapse so stunning it would ripple far beyond the walls of that hall. Across from him sat Jasmine Crockett, calm, steady, her eyes locked on him with an unshakable confidence. She wasn't flustered. She wasn't scrambling to play defense. She carried herself with the poise of someone who knew she had the truth on her side. And more than that, she had the receipts. Kirk opened with his trademark barrage, tossing out cherry-picked stats and loaded accusations, each line crafted to provoke. His fans erupted in applause, feeding his ego. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She let him finish. Her silence more powerful than his words, her stillness a warning of the storm about to break. And then, with surgical precision, she began. Her voice was measured, deliberate, slicing through Kirk's performance like a scalpel through paper. She reminded him of his own past statements, each contradiction sharper than the last. She laid out evidence so precise, so undeniable, that the energy in the room shifted in real time. Murmurs began to rise from the audience. Some of Kirk's own supporters exchanged uneasy glances. Charlie's smirk faltered, just for a second, as if he felt the ground shifting beneath him. He tried to interject, but Jasmine pressed on, her composure unshaken. Each fact landed like a hammer. Each receipt was a blow that couldn't be dodged. The smug certainty that once defined him was crumbling before everyone's eyes. But no one was prepared for what Jasmine Crockett pulled out next. For years, Charlie Kirk had built his brand on dominance. He wasn't just a conservative commentator, he was a showman, a provocateur who thrived on the thrill of confrontation. College campuses became his battlegrounds, viral clips his ammunition. Each time he reduced a student to silence or forced an opponent into defensive stammers, his legend grew. His platform painted him as the fearless champion of conservative youth, the man who could outtalk anyone anywhere. To his followers, he wasn't merely debating. He was winning the culture war. But beneath the spectacle was a pattern: the quick interruptions, the strawman arguments, the practiced sneer that drowned out nuance. His victories weren't built on truth, but on performance. And in a political landscape where optics often overshadow substance, that was enough. Until he found himself across from Jasmine Crockett. Crockett didn't come to spar for applause lines. She wasn't there to trade insults or play Kirk's game. She carried herself with a weight that came from more than talking points. It came from lived experience. While Kirk had spent his career amplifying outrage, Crockett had spent hers amplifying the voices of the unheard. Her presence alone shifted the balance of the debate, because she wasn't just an opponent. She was a mirror, reflecting back the emptiness of his bravado. The stakes were higher than a single debate stage. This was about the story of America itself. Kirk's persona represented a strain of arrogance, the belief that shouting loudest is the same as being right, that dominance can masquerade as leadership. Crockett represented something deeper, the quiet, steady resilience of those who have fought too long to be silenced again. In her, viewers could see the struggles of immigrants building lives from nothing, of families demanding dignity, of communities long ignored but never erased. Kirk knew the cameras were rolling, and he leaned into his usual theatrics. He laughed dismissively, rolled his eyes, and delivered barbs designed to go viral in 30-second clips. The crowd, his crowd, roared with approval. To the untrained eye it looked like Kirk was in control. But under the surface, something was shifting. Crockett's strategy wasn't to match his volume or mimic his sneer. It was to bide her time, to let his arrogance inflate until the weight of his own contradictions brought him down. Her calmness wasn't weakness, it was a warning. Every measured word she spoke carried the gravity of someone who had nothing to prove, and everything to reveal. This was no longer just a clash of personalities. It was a collision of values. On one side arrogance, spectacle, and empty swagger. On the other truth, lived reality, and the power of receipts. And when those two forces collide, history has shown that arrogance can shout, but truth echoes louder and longer. The audience sensed it before Kirk did. Subtle shifts in the room betrayed the change. The uneasy silence that followed Crockett's rebuttals, the faint murmurs when she cited his own words against him. Even those who had come to cheer Kirk began to lean back, their certainty wavering. Something unprecedented was unfolding. And just when Kirk thought he had the upper hand, Crockett's calm precision began dismantling his every claim. Charlie Kirk did not rise to prominence by accident. He engineered his persona carefully, carving out a role for himself as the relentless firebrand, the young warrior against what he called the tyranny of liberal elites. In the early days, he relished being underestimated. With slick hair, polished shoes, and a smirk that seemed permanently fixed, he presented himself as the boy wonder who could rattle professors, outwit students, and dominate town halls with little more than a sharp tongue and a microphone. His image was clear, brash, fearless, untouchable, but underneath the polish was a pattern of hypocrisy, the kind that revealed itself to anyone willing to look closely. Kirk preached the gospel of meritocracy, insisting that people should rise only through hard work and talent. Yet he himself climbed through the network of wealthy donors and political operatives eager to fund his rise. He railed against elitism, while building his entire empire on the backing of billionaires. He denounced cancel culture, while leading efforts to silence and blacklist those who dared to disagree with his worldview. Time and again, Kirk relied on arrogance to shield him from accountability. At debates on college campuses, he would lean over the microphone, eyes narrowing, delivering cutting insults meant not to enlighten but to humiliate. He often targeted the youngest, the shyest, those least equipped to volley back. Clips of these moments would circulate online, not because of the strength of his arguments, but because of the spectacle of dominance. He sold performance as truth, sneers as reason. One infamous incident captured the essence of his playbook. In a heated exchange with a college student who questioned his stance on healthcare, Kirk mocked the student's naivete, brushing off their lived experience with a dismissive chuckle. The crowd laughed with him, but those watching later noticed what he tried to bury. He had no real counterargument. The laughter was a mask, a distraction. This was Kirk's pattern, to substitute volume and bravado for substance. There were other moments too, darker ones, where his contradictions were impossible to ignore. He publicly railed against government spending, yet supported subsidies and bailouts when they benefited allies. He thundered about morality, yet turned a blind eye to corruption within his own circles. He spoke of protecting American values, while belittling the very people whose families had sacrificed most to build those values. Each contradiction was brushed aside in the glare of cameras and the roar of his supporters. For a while it worked. But arrogance carries with it a blindness, a belief that the performance will always hold, that the mask will never slip. Kirk's success made him reckless. He believed he could bully his way through any confrontation, that his smirk was stronger than any fact, that no one could hold him accountable because no one dared to. In private moments that leaked into public memory, this arrogance showed itself most clearly. At a donor dinner, Kirk joked about his critics, dismissing them as clueless kids who don't know what they're talking about. He bragged that he could own anyone, with little more than a clever one-liner. To his allies, this was bravado. To his opponents, it was proof that his empire rested not on substance but swagger. And yet, despite the cracks, Kirk thrived on the mythology of invincibility. Every stage confrontation, every viral clip, every debate where he sneered down an opponent added to the legend. His supporters weren't drawn to the strength of his logic, they were intoxicated by the spectacle of his arrogance. He was less a thinker than a performer, less a leader than a showman. But this is where his downfall was written long before Jasmine Crockett ever entered the stage. Because arrogance does not simply inflate a man's ego, it blinds him to his own weaknesses. Kirk never trained himself to confront truth head-on, he only trained himself to perform. And performance, no matter how polished, cannot withstand the weight of undeniable evidence. In Crockett, Kirk faced not another student to humiliate, not another opponent to drown out, but a challenger who refused to play by his script. She would not be bullied into silence, nor would she flinch under the gaze of his smirk. She carried not only her own convictions, but the lived experiences of those who had suffered under the policies Kirk so casually defended. She carried receipts, facts he could not twist, truths he could not sneer away. Kirk's persona had always depended on control, controlling the narrative, controlling the room, controlling the image of himself as unassailable. But arrogance breeds blind spots, and Crockett was about to find them all. Jasmine Crockett's story was never one of privilege or ease. It was a story carved out of determination, the kind of resilience that comes not from comfort but from struggle. She grew up knowing that the world does not hand justice to you. You have to fight for it, inch by inch, moment by moment. Her upbringing wasn't gilded with the trappings of wealth or a family name that opened doors. Instead, it was marked by the harder truths of American life. The inequities, the quiet battles, the lessons that teach you how to stand tall even when the world seems determined to push you down. From a young age, she carried with her the stories of her family, the struggles of her community. She understood that dignity isn't something you're given, it's something you defend. That seed planted early in life would shape everything. She became a lawyer, a legislator, and a voice for those who too often found themselves ignored in the rooms where decisions were made. Her path into law was not smooth, but it was deliberate. While others sought prestige, Crockett sought purpose. She chose to represent those society forgot: the poor, the marginalized, the people who walked into courtrooms already weighed down by assumptions. Each case she took was more than a paycheck. It was a chance to hold a system accountable, to remind the powerful that their authority was not absolute. There were late nights, endless paperwork, and battles that left her emotionally raw. But every win mattered, because every win meant someone's humanity had been recognized. And when the losses came, as they inevitably did, she carried those too, as fuel, as lessons, as reminders of why the fight had to continue. It was this grounding in struggle that set her apart. While others chased the spotlight, Crockett chased the truth. She had no need for theatrics. She had lived enough real drama in courtrooms and community meetings, enough heartbreak in seeing justice denied, that the political stage felt less like a performance and more like an extension of her duty. When she entered politics, she did so not as an insider playing the game, but as an outsider demanding the rules be changed. She spoke with a fire that came not from ambition but from urgency, because the communities she represented couldn't afford to wait for gradual change. They needed someone unafraid to stand in the storm, and so, she became that person. Her political service was marked by the same unshakable principles that guided her legal work. Justice wasn't abstract to her. Equality wasn't a slogan. They were lived necessities. In every hearing, every bill, every public appearance, she carried not just her own voice but the echo of those who rarely got to speak. This made her dangerous to opponents like Kirk. He thrived on caricaturing his challengers, reducing them to talking points. But Crockett couldn't be flattened into a soundbite. She was too real, too grounded, too unwilling to bend. What made her even more formidable was her ability to prepare. Years in the courtroom had sharpened her instincts. She knew how to listen, how to wait, how to build a case step by step until it became undeniable. She understood that timing mattered, that sometimes the most powerful move was not to shout first, but to let arrogance dig its own grave before you present the evidence. Crockett's preparation wasn't just about facts and figures, though she had those in abundance. It was about knowing her opponent's weaknesses. She studied Kirk's patterns, his habits, the moments where his arrogance pushed him to overreach. She knew he would underestimate her, dismiss her, and walk into the debate convinced it would be another easy conquest. And that was exactly what gave her the advantage. For the people who supported her, Crockett was more than a politician. She was proof that resilience can rise from struggle, that truth can stand against noise. She embodied the possibility that America's promise wasn't lost, only waiting for leaders willing to defend it. She was the underdog, yes, but in her people saw themselves. Their frustrations, their hopes, their dignity reflected back at them. And so when she took her seat across from Kirk, it wasn't just Jasmine Crockett sitting there. It was every community that had been mocked, every citizen dismissed as irrelevant, every voice drowned out by arrogance. It was the weight of lived history, the scars of injustice, and the stubborn belief that truth still matters. Kirk looked at her and saw an opponent he could smirk away. What he didn't see, what his arrogance made him blind to, was the years of struggle that had forged her. He didn't see the late nights, the courtroom battles, the communities that stood behind her. He didn't see that she wasn't there to trade jabs, but to deliver judgment. So when she stepped onto that stage, she wasn't just another opponent. She was destiny in motion. The opening shots of the debate came just as anyone familiar with Charlie Kirk expected. He leaned into the microphone with that performative half grin, throwing out quick barbs designed to land like punches. His words dripped with condescension. "You know, Congresswoman, it's cute when people who've never created a job lecture the rest of us on economics." He sneered, drawing laughter from a section of the crowd primed to cheer his every insult. But Crockett didn't bite. She sat upright, her face calm, her eyes steady. Instead of snapping back, she let the words hang in the air until the chuckles began to fade. And then, in a voice even and unshaken, she replied, "What's really cute, Mr. Kirk, is thinking that parroting billionaire talking points somehow counts as expertise." The room shifted. Gasps mixed with scattered applause. His jab had landed, but hers had pierced. Kirk wasn't used to that. He tried again, this time interrupting before she could finish her sentence, waving his hand dismissively as though her words were beneath him. "You're dodging, Jasmine. Typical." He flashed the grin again, waiting for the audience to laugh along. But instead of laughter, there was murmuring. People weren't laughing as hard anymore. They were listening. Crockett's composure became her weapon. She never raised her voice, never descended into mockery. Each time he interrupted, she paused, let him burn through his theatrics, and then calmly picked up right where she left off. Her rhythm became unshakable, while his grew more frantic. The more he pushed, the clearer it became that he was fighting to dominate, while she was fighting to illuminate. And then came the first turn. Kirk tried to pin her on immigration, delivering a line rehearsed for viral sound bites. If you actually cared about working families, you'd stop letting illegals flood into our country and take their jobs. He leaned back, satisfied, sure that the applause would follow. But this time the applause was faint. Too faint. Because Crockett was already leaning in. Her reply cut through the silence. My family came from people who had nothing. They worked jobs no one else would take. And those sacrifices built the foundation of this country you claim to defend. Don't you dare talk about working families while you line up to protect the wealthy few who exploit them. The crowd erupted. It wasn't just applause. It was a wave, the kind of reaction that shifts the energy in a room. On social media, the clip was already trending within seconds. Viewers at home were tweeting things like, "She cooked him with facts and dignity." And finally, someone stood up to the smirk. Kirk's confidence wavered. He tried to laugh it off, interrupt again, drown her out with volume. But every time he opened his mouth, Crockett grew stronger. Her calm presence made his antics look desperate. His interruptions no longer read as dominance. They read as insecurity. And the audience could feel it. The tension in the room climbed with each exchange. Every time Kirk struck, Crockett absorbed the blow and countered with precision. Every time he sneered, she responded with clarity that exposed the weakness of his arguments. It was as though the debate were a boxing match where one fighter exhausted themselves with wild swings, while the other conserved their energy, waiting for the opening to land the decisive strike. Commentators live blogging the event started shifting their tone. At first, they framed it as another Kirk showcase. But as the minutes ticked by, their updates grew more astonished. Crockett isn't rattled. Kirk looks flustered. This might not go the way he expected. Still, Crockett hadn't fully revealed her hand. Her precision so far had been devastating, yes, but it was only the beginning. She was laying the groundwork, letting the audience see the contrast clearly: Kirk the performer versus Crockett the truth teller. She was building anticipation, preparing the stage for something bigger, something undeniable. Because Crockett wasn't here just to spar. She was here to end the charade. And the room could feel it. Every pause, every controlled response, every fact sharpened the suspense. Kirk was unraveling, and everyone sensed that the climax was near. But the real blow hadn't landed yet. Crockett was holding it back for the perfect moment. It began with silence. Not the kind of silence that comes from indifference, but the kind that thickens the air, the kind that makes people lean forward without even realizing it. Jasmine Crockett had been calm throughout the night, letting Kirk burn himself out on arrogance and interruptions. But now she shifted slightly in her seat, drew in a breath, and the room sensed something was about to change. "Mr. Kirk," she began, her tone even, deliberate. "You like to talk about facts. You like to talk about accountability. So let's talk about your own record, since you've made yourself the authority on integrity." Kirk's smirk flickered. He straightened, ready to laugh off whatever was coming. But Crockett didn't rush. She let the pause hang, her eyes fixed on him with a steadiness that unnerved. And then, she reached for the folder beside her. The sound of paper sliding across the desk was almost theatrical. She lifted a document, held it delicately, and began to read. "On June 14, 2018, you said, quote, 'We need to stop corporations from exploiting American workers with cheap labor.' Yet 1 month later, your organization accepted donations from those same corporations." Her eyes rose from the page. "How do you explain that?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. Kirk laughed, the nervous kind, brushing it off with a wave of his hand. "Out of context," he said, his voice pitched just a little too high. But Crockett wasn't finished. She slid another page from the folder. "Out of context. Then let's add more context. On September 2, 2019, during a live podcast, you bragged about personally lobbying against worker protections for the very same industries you claim exploit them. Those are your words, not mine." The smirk was gone. His jaw tightened, his eyes darted, searching for a lifeline. The audience, once rowdy with laughter, had gone still. Gasps punctuated the silence, and someone in the back whispered audibly, "He's cooked." Crockett pressed on, her cadence measured like a lawyer building a case. Because that's exactly what she was. Each piece of evidence came with precision: a quote here, a financial disclosure there, a video clip played back on the big screen. With every receipt, Kirk's posture slumped further. "You talk about protecting families," she said, "but your record shows you've done more to protect billionaires than anyone else. You talk about morality, but you've defended corruption when it suited your donors. You posture about patriotism, But you've aligned yourself with movements that trample the very freedoms you claim to cherish, so I have to ask, who are you really fighting for? The audience broke. Applause thundered, drowning out Kirk's attempt to stammer a response. He raised his hand, tried to interrupt, but his voice was lost beneath the roar. The crowd wasn't laughing with him anymore. They were laughing at him. And then came the moment that turned the debate into legend. Crockett leaned back, allowed the noise to settle, and in the calmest voice she'd used all night, she delivered the blow. The truth is simple, Charlie. You've built a career not on integrity, but on performance. And performances end when the curtain falls. Tonight, that curtain has dropped. The room exploded. Students were on their feet, clapping, cheering, some chanting her name. Cameras flashed. Kirk's face, red with frustration, was plastered across every lens. He tried to speak, but every word was swallowed by the ovation. Within minutes, clips of the moment hit social media. On Twitter, the hashtag #CrocketCookKirk began trending nationwide. Memes flooded timelines side by sides of Kirk's fading smirk and Crockett's steady gaze, gifs of her sliding the folder across the table, captions like, "Receipts don't lie" and "The curtain has dropped." TikTok lit up with remixes, edits, and reaction videos, each one amplifying the spectacle. Commentators jumped in almost immediately. Progressive voices hailed it as the takedown of the year. Even some conservative pundits, usually loyal to Kirk, admitted on air that he looked rattled and unprepared. Late-night hosts began scripting monologues before the debate had even ended. On Instagram, celebrities reposted the clip with fire emojis and captions like, "This is how you handle arrogance." For the people who had long endured Kirk's smug dominance, the moment felt cathartic, like a collective exhale. They saw in Crockett not just a debater but a defender, someone willing to confront arrogance with dignity, someone who refused to be bullied into silence. Kirk, meanwhile, sat stone-faced, his earlier confidence evaporated. His hands fidgeted, his eyes avoided the cameras. Every attempt to recover sounded weaker than the last. He had entered the debate believing he was untouchable. Now he looked like a man exposed, stripped of his armor by nothing more than the truth. The power of the moment wasn't just in the words Crockett delivered, but in how she delivered them. She didn't shout. She didn't gloat. She simply laid out the evidence, fact by fact, and let Kirk's own contradictions bury him. Her restraint was devastating because it highlighted the emptiness of his bravado. Where he had sneered, she had stood steady. Where he had mocked, she had spoken with clarity. Where he had performed, she had revealed. And in that contrast, the story wrote itself. Arrogance undone by truth, noise silenced by dignity, performance eclipsed by reality. The debate wasn't over, but the outcome was clear. The legend of Charlie Kirk's invincibility had cracked wide open, and Jasmine Crockett had been the one to strike the blow. But if the live audience's reaction was big, the online explosion would be seismic. The moment Jasmine Crockett dropped her receipts, the debate hall erupted. But the true explosion didn't happen in that room. It happened online. Within minutes, Twitter was ablaze. The clip of Kirk's smirk evaporating as Crockett calmly read his own words back to him spread like wildfire. By the end of the night, the hashtag #CrocketCookKirk wasn't just trending nationally. It was trending worldwide. Memes flooded every platform. On Instagram, side-by-sides showed Kirk's red face dissolving next to Crockett's unshakable calm. TikTok was alive with edits. Some creators slowed the footage down for dramatic effect, layering in cinematic music as she slid the folder across the table. Others remixed it with laugh tracks and captions like, "When you bring receipts to a clown fight." One viral duet showed a grandmother watching the clip, shaking her head and saying, "Baby, that's how you handle a bully." Even on platforms where Kirk had once thrived, the tide turned. His supporters tried to spin the narrative, but the receipts were too clear, the footage too undeniable. The harder they pushed, the faster the memes multiplied. By morning, it wasn't just Crockett's base celebrating, it was the internet itself. Commentators seized on the moment. Progressive outlets hailed it as a generational clash where truth finally triumphed over arrogance. Headlines blared, "Crockett ends the smirk," and "Receipts don't lie." Late-night hosts replayed the footage with comedic relish, their audiences roaring as Crockett's calm precision contrasted with Kirk's unraveling facade. What shocked even more people were the unlikely acknowledgments. A conservative-leaning columnist, known for rarely breaking ranks, admitted in a column that Crockett methodically dismantled Kirk in a way that no opponent has before. A centrist political podcast, usually dismissive of viral debate moments, described it as the night Charlie Kirk lost control of his own narrative. Even some Republican officials, speaking off the record, confessed their frustration. "He made us all look unserious." She had him cornered. For viewers at home, especially those long tired of Kirk's arrogance, the moment was more than entertainment, it was validation. People who had felt belittled, dismissed, or silence saw themselves in Crockett's poise. Immigrant families replayed her words about sacrifice, nodding through tears as they heard their own stories reflected back. Young activists felt emboldened, writing posts about how her composure proved you don't need to shout to speak powerfully. Parents told their children to watch the clip, calling it a masterclass in dignity. The ripple effect stretched into workplaces, classrooms, and family dinners. In group chats, people shared memes with captions like, "This is the energy we need in 2025. In college lecture halls, professors used the moment to spark discussions about debate, power, and truth. In coffee shops and community centers, people replayed the clip on their phones, smiling as if a personal victory had been won, and the numbers told the story too. Within 24 hours, Crockett's takedown racked up tens of millions of views across platforms. Her follower count soared. Fundraising links circulated in the comments of viral posts, bringing in small dollar donations from people who had never given to politics before. She had struck a chord deeper than anyone expected. Kirk, meanwhile, struggled to recover. His attempts at damage control only made matters worse. A late-night livestream where he tried to explain away the receipts drew mockery. If you have to spend an hour explaining, you already lost. His clipped responses and interviews were cut into memes that made him look even weaker. For a man who built his brand on dominance, the image of him flustered and cornered was devastating. The power of the moment wasn't just in Crockett's words, but in how they resonated beyond the debate stage. It wasn't just about her dismantling Kirk. It was about what that dismantling meant. Viewers saw not just a political clash, but a symbolic victory: dignity over arrogance, resilience over mockery, truth over performance. For millions, it was proof that arrogance, no matter how loud, could be humbled by clarity. The internet laughed, yes, but it also celebrated. It felt like a turning point, a reminder that truth has a way of breaking through noise. Crockett's receipts weren't just paper. They were a mirror held up to power, reflecting back its contradictions for everyone to see. And in that reflection, ordinary people found themselves vindicated. And yet, beyond the laughter and memes, a deeper lesson began to surface. When the applause finally quieted and the roar of the internet began to settle into words and hashtags, Jasmine Crockett did something remarkable. She didn't bask in the victory. She didn't gloat. Instead, she shifted the spotlight away from herself and toward a larger truth. "Tonight isn't about me and it isn't about him," she said, gesturing lightly toward Kirk, whose smirk had long since dissolved into a hollow stare. "It's about what we choose to value in this country. Do we want arrogance dressed up as strength? Or do we want dignity that refuses to back down, even when the odds are stacked against it?" The room stilled again. This time it wasn't suspense holding the air, but reverence. Crockett had turned a takedown into a lesson, a victory into a reflection. She reminded the audience that this wasn't just another debate clip for the algorithm. It was a moment that revealed something deeper about who we are as a people. In that room, one commentator would later write, "History whispered, arrogance can shout, but truth always echoes louder." That whisper became the heartbeat of Crockett's message. She spoke of the families who had been dismissed, the workers exploited, the communities caricatured by voices like Kirk's. She reminded everyone that truth, even when drowned out for a season, has a way of resurfacing with undeniable force. And when it does, it humbles the loudest of pretenders. Her words didn't land as partisan jabs, they landed as universal truths. Everyone has faced arrogance in their lives, in classrooms, in workplaces, in politics. Everyone knows what it feels like to be spoken over, mocked, dismissed. And everyone knows the quiet triumph of standing tall anyway. Crockett tapped into that collective memory, transforming her personal victory into a shared one. For many watching at home, it wasn't just politics, it was personal. Immigrant families heard her defense of sacrifice and nodded, knowing their labor, often invisible, built the foundations of this country. Young women saw her stand unflinching under interruption and felt seen, their own experiences echoed in her composure. Communities long marginalized felt a surge of validation. Someone had stood up to arrogance, not with more noise, but with clarity and truth. And that was the moral Crockett delivered with precision. Arrogance feeds on spectacle, truth builds on substance. Manipulation can dominate a moment, dignity can define a generation. What Kirk represented was not just himself, but a culture of performance politics that prizes humiliation over understanding, bluster over honesty. What Crockett showed was that there is another way, a way grounded in values that cannot be mocked out of existence. She ended not with a slam, but with a challenge. Every time we let arrogance win, we lose something greater than an argument. We lose part of ourselves. But every time we choose dignity, we strengthen what binds us together. That choice isn't made on stages like this one. It's made every day in our homes, in our workplaces, in our communities. The audience was silent, not because they disagreed, but because they were absorbing. Even those who had come to cheer Kirk couldn't deny the clarity of her words. The debate had begun as a battle of egos, but it ended as a call to conscience. Crockett reframed the clash not as a contest of personalities, but as a test of values. The internet carried her message beyond the hall. Alongside the memes and hashtags came heartfelt posts, young people writing about how her composure inspired them, parents saying they'd replay her words for their children, activists noting that dignity doesn't trend often enough. But it should. In that moment, Jasmine Crockett wasn't just a debater, or even just a politician. She became a symbol of something larger: the quiet power of truth, the enduring strength of dignity, the reminder that arrogance may win headlines but never hearts. And as the lights dimmed and the evening drew to a close, her final words hung in the air like a challenge to everyone watching. The choice, as always, rests with us. Charlie Kirk was exposed, but let's be clear. Jasmine Crockett didn't just end his argument that night. She ended the myth of his invincibility. For years, Kirk strutted across stages, smirking as though untouchable, as though louder meant stronger. But in one debate, with calm precision and undeniable receipts, Crockett revealed what so many had always known: arrogance cracks under the weight of truth. This wasn't just about one man losing face. It was about what happens when dignity refuses to yield. It was about reminding America that no matter how many microphones arrogance hides behind, truth only needs one voice to pierce through the noise. And now, it's your turn. If you felt that moment, if you saw yourself in Crockett's composure, if you've ever faced down a smirk and stood your ground, then add your voice to this movement. Subscribe to this channel for more stories where justice silences arrogance. Drop a comment below with your own receipt moments, times when you or someone you know stood firm against lies and walked away stronger. Because your story matters, too. Share this video with friends, family, and anyone who needs the reminder that truth still wins. Every view, every share, every voice builds a chorus louder than arrogance could ever shout. Crockett showed us what it looks like when dignity triumphs over mockery, when values outlast cheap performance. And that victory doesn't belong only to her. It belongs to all of us who choose to carry it forward. Because when truth speaks, no career of lies can survive.